Yeah, so I just wrote this down. So this is largely from my reading of Opar, and I've broken it down by branch of philosophy. And then I've gone, all right, so what? All right, cool. Existence exists, identity, consciousness, causality, volition, which by the way, I'm not clear on. So I didn't necessarily formulate into anything. This is just purely from memory. I haven't checked anything,
Yeah.
so it could be inaccurate.
Right.
Primacy of existence. And I'm like, all right, so what? Like, where are these principles that are like, how do I actually do anything with this? And I'm like, all right, well, let me think about it. Okay, so one is contradictory thoughts imply errors as contradictions do not exist in reality. That's the law. That's the application of the law of identity. Then I said, all right, well, I should consciously distinguish between, this is probably too abstract as well, necessary and contingent, since I'm not clear on those. But the point is, I think there's some kind of principle as far as like, I can't get angry at nature. I can't stamp my foot at a computer not working. But I was trying to get at something like that. But these are both kind of mouthfuls. Like, it's not like I can walk through my day going, well, am I applying the principle that contradictory thoughts imply errors, contradictions do not exist in reality, which is an application of the law of identity? Like, that is not tenable to help guide any of my thought processes. Like, maybe if I sat and I went through a list and I went through a textbook each time, but that's impossible. And so this is a question of, I mean, that's one example. We can discuss in detail once I've gone through all of them.
Yeah.
And then here, so I've gone down some things from epistemology as well. CCD, genus differentia method of definition is necessary to retain concepts efficiently. And here are my summarized principles, basically. These you'll know, but for the most part. But
Yeah.
Reason is man's basic needs of survival, which I also need to concretize. So not everything am I clear on fully, but all right, summarize principles. If I had to put them in principles, it'd be don't take over concepts from others without first reducing it to the perceptual level and contextually integrating it yourself. So if someone uses some word like, I don't know, the environment or emotional safety, like, be real clear on what exactly is being referred to. What are the concepts? What do they refer to? What do they help distinguish? Don't just take over random phrases, which I would do, and I probably still do to some extent. That's one principle. Then constantly be open to new information and seeks to identify its relationship to your pre-existing hierarchy of knowledge. Are there contradictions? Can you file information away into a specific concept? See, these are all mouthfuls, though. Continuously seek to induce principles by which you make decisions and take actions. Train your focus every day. Question mark, because I was wondering about like applications of meditation or whatever. Consult with your emotion and improve consulting with them, but don't decide by them. Anyway, I think you sort of see the point. Ethics is a bit of a blank because I'm not that clear on principles yet. Then I did some principles of thinking. Each thought must have a purpose. The purpose must be clear. Ask questions and judge those questions in relation to the relevance to the purpose. But like, this is just too much. As in, okay, I got the idea. Like, I can start to agree and understand with a certain philosophy, which I'm not there yet, but there are parts where I'm like, okay, I'm starting to see how this works. But then this is my attempt to be like, so what? How do I make this part of me? And for what I have so far, just seems like, how the hell do you walk around and adopt a new philosophy? And like, it's even with principles, like, how do I put that in a form that I can actually use? I have no idea. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, but.
Yeah, I do see how I could answer that. I'm not sure it's going to be satisfactory. It's just where I'm going with the thinking now. A lot of these things can be forms of or derivative of a virtue or those moral principles. Um, a lot of these can be related to either productivity or independence. Sometimes honesty, sometimes integrity. All of these things you listed, even. I know. I mean, that's the so what about it. That's the so what is that these are part of moral principles of how to live and the way of understanding what living by your nature and how to do it.
All right, I get it. So, because I'm still confused by some of the stuff in morality. You're saying that all this stuff in here, like metaphysics, epistemology, you don't, the whatever you learn from those fields then enter morality, and they're integrated into a specific virtue. That's what you're saying, right?
Or multiple virtues, but yes.
Right. And then it's like it fits nicely in a little a little
Right.
box.
That's
Well,
the objectivist understanding of that.
yeah, okay. But it's not like it's simple necessarily. It's just you've got a way to integrate it into a
Yeah, I mean,
concept.
of course, it's a ton of information. That's where you have the integration, and you might learn how to fill out those principles better.
Yeah.
And you can have principles within principles, like
Right.
up top. Like I would just say, even don't take over concepts from others. Like that's really just independence.
Yeah. Okay.
And what you
Yeah,
say,
you're right.
contradictory thoughts, that might just be just law of identity, or that's why Rand says A is A, because that's kind of captures what the law of identity is. It's anything else is not reality, or doesn't exist in reality. That's kind of what that captures when you say that.
But okay, so let's say these feed into some virtue, and then I get
Yes.
to the point where I've got this big list, and I've got like, let's say, I think I wrote some of them down because I remembered them, but I grade it because I'm not clear on them. Anyway, here they are. All right, I got this list, but how do I walk around with this list and be like, so in this how do I apply? Now I'm taking a step in this direction. I'm going to get a water. Am I applying independence? Am I applying integrity? Like I'm not, it sounds funny, but I'm literally trying to go, how do I make this fully a part of me? Like in every single aspect, it just seems ridiculously impossible. Like what, you're going to walk around with this list like Charlie Munger of 100 mental models and just through every decision you're going to try apply. Is that how it works?
I mean, in a way, that's what's happening. I know what you mean. It's not like conscious. You have the list and you're walking around in your hand every second. Like, what do I do here now? Like, you don't, your mind is quick and rapid and fast. So a part of that is how to habituate, which I don't think objectivism really says how to habituate, how to make it part of you.
Right.
I think that's something missing, and only psychology could really say, or at least the sort of things Nathaniel Brandon talks about that Rand was not an expert in, are the kind of things that can answer that. What, the how, or how do we make this part of our life and our nature, which I think Rand says pretty well the what of what you need to achieve, but that how I think is often left open, and you're not provided with the means to do so. Unfortunately, and even Rand admitted she didn't know enough psychology.
I understand. Okay, so we don't. Okay, here's where we're at. We're saying that all these principles could be integrated into virtues. So specific, both virtues are both things you practice in your thinking and in actions, in existential applications. And you could list them and you could describe them, and you could practice thinking about their application to different situations. That's one thing. So all of this, I can find eventually a way to integrate it into this here, right here. But then the next question becomes this one, is what you're saying. Like, all right, now I've integrated it. I understand it. I can explain to you why it's true. I know what it refers to. I know how it relates to my other knowledge. I'm very clear on it in a concrete way mentally, but then we're left with, all right, now how do you become this? How do you embody this? And you're left, that's what you're saying. We're left with that open-ended question.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
How to become it. And at least we have a theory here that it matters what we understand conceptually, and that can bring our subconscious to act or perform in an appropriate way. But there's still more things that need to be done besides even just these thinking habits. Like how do you make it, fold it into yourself? How do you make it part of your living rather than just thoughts? Like that's sometimes why I talk about memory or things like that, because that's usually a matter of making these things habitual, making them quick to come to mind without even thinking about it much, or trying to look for it in your mind. It just appears, or it just happens. And even many medieval thinkers thought that way. Like they knew they understood that they can give you the facts, but it was always a concern. Will you remember what to do? Will you even remember what the virtues are when it comes time to be virtuous? And this would be a
Okay.
way you are by understanding the nature of how these, for one, you're making them into principles. You're condensing the knowledge. That's a key thing we're doing here, at least. That's a big part of what objectivism points out, that you have to condense your knowledge. And that's a key thing to be able to recall these things when you need them, to be able to use them when you need them. I mean, if you could just recall every fact immediately in the exact concrete detail, well, you probably wouldn't need principles. Your mind would be like perfect, it would always give you the right examples every time. But with this way, this is taking into account the way the human mind works. We have to have these principles and efficient thinking and things like that to condense it all. And then we could have things like, how do we imagine these things or visualize these things? Which is what Pika says about imagining the truck. That's part of making these things able to come to mind easier, more quickly. So you don't need to sit there with the list in front of you.
So I wrote this, which is basically what I'm thinking then. So I'm still at the stage of even trying to integrate all this stuff, right? And make sure I'm even clear on it, which I'm not on a lot.
Right.
But I can see that I didn't even make that connection, which is really cool that you mentioned that. But I can see how, so when we study philosophy, we're coming to all these descriptive conclusions, which then become normative. Is that, I'm using that right? They become normative.
Yeah.
And we use them then to guide our actions. So then all this stuff, once I understand certain virtues or create categories for virtues, I can then file it into whatever the appropriate one is. And that will be one step forward. It won't be this mess of like metaphysical principles, epistemological, like unless I'm specifically studying that philosophical branch. And so anyway, I've done that. And then I start filing them in here. And what I just realized is if I can be really clear on virtue and what they are and what they're referring to, then anytime going forward, I read a book, whether it's Victor Hugo or Dostoevsky or A.G. Yoshikawa or Ayn Rand or Gregory Roberts, whoever it is, I can actually start identifying, here is an instance of independence. Here is an instance of integrity. And that will help me do that thing of, as the knife and truck, I think is what you said, as the truck, but, basically help me retain. But if I, as I read now, I have no way to file away what I'm seeing. It's all just this stuff flowing in front of me. And so, like if I read a book about someone committing some act, I'm like, I don't like that, but I don't have a way to conceptually identify it. And so I can't file it away and it just flows past. But once I go through this section, and also I'm reading Plato and Socrates and all that, and I start getting a really clear idea of what these are, then when I read, I can use that as help to help me fill up those categories with more clear knowledge and connections, right? So that's the integration, condensation, keeping trucks and knives in my concepts and cakes.
Yeah.
And then, and then we're not there yet, but once I get there, then of course, I could see how I might even walk around, like then it becomes a scientific question almost of like, all right, and maybe like you're saying, a psychological question. Do I walk around with a list? Do I put myself through challenges where I attempt to, like then it becomes a question of that. But I can see the role of art and fiction then suddenly in this specific aspect.
Yeah, that's the right idea. And of course you can start filing things and see you make a mistake and change it later. Like you have to go back and forth sometimes. Like these very more abstract things like the virtues, maybe sometimes you just switch things up a bit if you learn more things about epistemology and back and forth.
Right. Okay. Cool. That's really cool. I didn't make that connection between the virtues and.
Yeah, it's not obvious, and that's why I always think it takes a while to really understand Rand's way of thinking about these things. That it's not really the same usual philosophical argument you might see, and some people might argue that it's not a good way to write or whatever, or good philosophy, but I think you get there eventually. It's just a way of thinking that not many other people used, so it's
Can
going to
you
be very difficult.
can you tell me about? You said people aren't used to her. What are we referring to when we're saying her way or method of thinking, specifically in relation to this? Like,
I would,
isn't this the idea that isn't this the same idea as Socrates walking around figuring out what virtue is, and virtue is a thing you practice to make
yeah,
something make you a better person.
yeah. I mean more like the way she wrote that. She's like, she called herself a novelist and philosopher, or even
Right.
thought of herself as a philosopher first. And some people thought that as pretentious, or people might think, oh, she didn't read, she doesn't know like the formal philosophy, she's not arguing the formal way, or she's not precise enough, or she's making these childish arguments, but those are usually, or they might take one thing that they don't like about her style that might be off-putting to some people and say that, well, look, she has a stupid paragraph I hate that you shouldn't have written, so the whole thing's stupid. Like, look at her, I mean, you can probably find some paragraphs that you think
But
that was
what
like unnecessary what she wrote, but
But I don't get what different, like, wouldn't you approach any philosophy like this by identifying the primary branches and then trying to figure out what the implications are for morality? Isn't that just
I'll
the,
put it this way. I guess it's more Aristotelian in an ancient Greek way of thinking, and that's historically, especially around Rand's time, Aristotle wasn't like um, as academically important. Like it was more like about like logical positivism in Rand's time, or behaviorism in psychology, or more analytical things like Wittgenstein, or even like other philosophers really about these analytical way of thinking, a very abstracted away from reality way of thinking. So more like in that sense, she was divorced almost from the academic way of doing things about the field of philosophy. So it's kind of like just a different way of going about doing philosophy and the way it was done in the field at the time. You might find people like that in continental philosophy, like say Sartre or things like that. And for whatever reason, people respect them more, even though they just wrote books like Rand did, wrote about philosophy like Rand did. It's odd to me. It's like maybe she could be like them a bit. It's all about the literature and all things like that. And or some people think of her as Nietzsche, but an immature Nietzsche that's bad at philosophy.
okay, but what is the, can you just, so I know, like, look at what I've written, right?
Yeah.
Are you saying this approach? I'm not talking about the specific contents. I'm
Okay.
talking about, like, there is a thing called metaphysics, epistemology, and then from those, I mean, the idea is that morality condenses everything we know about the world and knowledge
Yeah.
into principles for,
Yeah.
isn't that the same in every field? That's what I'm not clear on. You're
Um,
saying
it
what is
should
in the
be.
method? What is different in the method is what I'm trying to get at. Because you
Okay.
mentioned
So
Wittgenstein, Sartre. You can give me
okay.
examples from those.
Okay. Um, well, they weren't about as integrating all these fields. They didn't make it as explicit as Rand, and she was always saying, like it's a system that you organize, and they were pretty much like almost like against systems in a way. Like Wittgenstein would probably argue there's no such thing as a system. You can't do it this way because it's just a word game here. It's nothing. There's no
Right.
actual integration here. So he just wouldn't even do it. He would just pick apart your arguments and just nitpick them until there's nothing left. Um,
Okay. All
or
right.
Sartre might say like all that matters are like your radical freedom. Like he's not going to be analyzing these things as much as like you can decide these things with what you will based on the nature of reality. That's hard to understand. Like it's not that you couldn't integrate things. It's just more like the will you wish to integrate or the will you wish to put on the world. Like you have the meaning in the world is only what you create or something like that. And it's more primacy of consciousness. Like you're not integrating all these things as much as finding the way to use your will or use your mind. to create the world you want, but not as heroic as Rand might put it. More like it's not like you're integrating these things. Like you might have separate fields, but maybe everything is rooted in some metaphysical question, like who am I and what am I? And Rand isn't really thinking in terms of that. She's more like thinking of like the nature of the mind. How does the mind work? And having that inform the way we conceive of the world and decide how to think and act in the world. I think that's part of a difference. So that's why Rand takes more about integration, because she's really focused on the nature of the mind. I think that's a very unique thing about her, especially that time. Because now everybody's into like cognitive psychology and cognitive thinking, but in the 50s and 60s, it wasn't really a big thing. And that's why you had what they call the cognitive revolution since the late 70s, where everybody's thinking about the mind and everything to do with that. And Rand was like in the beginning of that. I don't know how influential she was, but she was there, like among some other philosophers. Now there's tons of philosophers who might see how these things might relate, or they at least can understand where it's coming from.
Sorry, when you say these things, do you mean different fields of philosophy?
Probably, yeah. Like philosophy of mind is a bigger thing, and Aristotle has become, or at least Aristotelian ways of thinking are more acceptable, I guess you could say, or more academically interesting. Like I can give you some names if you were curious, but
Sure.
but it has gotten more attention or more respect, I guess.
Right.
And more attention to the mind and the nature of thinking. I think that's what has changed a lot.
Okay, my question to you then is, it just seems like what you're saying is that she differs in the way she thinks, but philosophy as a field itself, I can approach any philosophy with this particular way of looking at things, and it's not unique to Rand. It's Aristotelian, isn't it?
I would say so. Yes, I guess.
Obviously, she made innovations, but to say that you can look at a field called metaphysics and then a field called epistemology and then morality and look at a relationship between them. Are you saying that's only Rand's way of dealing with, or her unique?
I think you'd be right. It'd be Aristotelian. So I wouldn't say it's unique.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm saying that as a question because I haven't studied enough.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I think a lot of Greek philosophers, even Roman philosophers, did have more of an integrated look. That they did take all the fields and they were more integrated about it. They're putting it together, or at least trying to. Not necessarily well, but generally trying to.
Right.
Well, not with Plato. Plato would be a bit different, but even he was a bit more integrated. He's like, there's still the different fields that determine other things. Like he would be somewhat integrated, but
right.
And what Rand would be unique about Rand is the focus on the mind, I think.
Right. Okay.
And that's even, you could argue that she put even more attention on the organization of these subfields.
Got it.
Because of the extent she thinks the mind is so important that you have to integrate them in an efficient, clear, and organized way.
But I can still use this by looking at philosophy, by thinking of philosophy in terms of these branches, which is not unique to Rand. I could still look at Sartre or Wittgenstein and come to see that, okay, this way of looking at things. I mean, if you think concepts are just words, then why would you look into virtues or whatever? Like, how does that make any sense? So I could still look at other philosophers from that lens, right?
Yeah, you could fit them in a way to say, like, what kind of moral principles are implied by Wittgenstein, for instance. And you might say that you can't really fit anything in there.
Sorry, apologies. I got a phone is.
No problem.
Oh, let me just pause it.
Yeah.
Work it out. Okay, there we go. It's working. Yeah, so I could look at all of them through these different fields. You're saying.
Yeah, they would use all these fields, and even Rand's organization could be used to like see like, well, if a philosopher thought this, what's its relationship to what they think in terms of morality? Like you'll see that there is some implied relationship, even if they don't explicitly recognize it.
Right. What were you saying about the medieval thinkers and the questions of memory? You said something about there were medieval thinkers thinking about like, if you know what a virtue is and you forget it. Also, could you expand on that a bit? I don't
Yes.
really fully remember.
So a lot of medieval thinkers, even Aquinas, had thought a lot about memory techniques for the purpose that people can recall how to be virtuous when they need to. So you don't have just these long, extremely complex texts to memorize, to
Right.
recite. Rather, you use different visual symbols, different condensations of information, even images, like literally drawings. Like you could use that to remember things
Sounds like art
better.
almost, drawings, if
In
we're
a
doing
way,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
Some monks would even draw pictures in the margins as a way to indicate where in a book something was, and they could use that to memorize text or what was where. They had weird, strange images. Like you even see images of like knights fighting giant snails. It's very strange images. Apparently, that's the way to remember things too. But specifically about virtue, that was more given to like that's more for the regular people. Like that's the way you would have certain statues representing different sins, or different angels representing a certain type of virtue or moral thought or something. And all you do is recall that image to be able to reproduce the memory of those virtues or sins or whatever they might be.
Wow. Okay. So that is a case for art being as to philosophy what word is to concept.
Probably. They weren't quite didactic, so yeah, I would say so. They weren't just to teach you how to be good, but that's part of the reason why it was seen as important, like
Right.
seeing the cognitive value of these things.
Right.
And
Wow.
even Dante's Inferno, in a way, is just a conceptual organization of different sins and errors you can make. Like the top level of hell would be the least bad sins that put you in hell. And the bottom is for the worst, like Judas. And you could conceptualize different degrees of sin, different kinds of sin, things like that. And
Okay.
even the levels of heaven in a similar way. There's degrees of good, and you can conceptualize it better with those, with the whole conceptual organization, as in hell and heaven are organized in a way that you only need to recall the structure of heaven or the shape of hell to then recall all these facts or keep in mind the different principles they need to remember.
Very interesting. That's why I struggled. I tried to read the whole Divine Comedy. I didn't. I
Yeah.
started with whatever the first book was and found it impossible. But now that you're saying this, it would make sense that I might need to have a really good knowledge of the Bible, both the New and Old, and Christianity to be able to make sense of it.
Yeah, or at least appreciate it. I mean, I can't stand it either. I just know this is how it works because
Right.
of how much I've read about these memory things. Because I had to do a lot of reading about it for my thesis, like memory techniques. And so I delved into the history of why they were used and when they were used. And really, they all root in philosophy, these memory techniques, in order to remember better facts or virtues or better creative thought. But it was always some purpose of some reason to it. It wasn't just I remember stuff. It's usually I want to remember stuff because it makes me a better thinker, more efficient thinker, anything like that.
Right. Okay, that's very interesting. And have we made much innovation since in the field of memory, and not in terms of academic research, but techniques? Because there's all these books on like how to memorize this, how to use this technique to memorize this thing. Like, do you think
It's
that's
hard to
all
say.
just variations of the same things that were discovered by medievals and whatever else?
I would say so, and I
Okay.
think they can be innovated more.
Okay.
Whether even that's maybe through virtual reality or different memory technology assistance and things like
Right.
that. So I do think yes, there's more that can be done
Right.
with applied research.
Okay, that's interesting. All right. So, I mean, I guess memory is a separate question. And from a large amount of what you said, it does seem like art is playing a significant role in assisting memory retention of something like a virtue or an evil, or
Yes.
a virtue or a vice. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
Even in the case of medievals. All right. Cool. So, I mean, I see where this is going. I need to obviously keep developing understanding, clarifying contradictions, so on, and then integrate them into virtues. And then from there, I could probably even start this now to some extent, but from there, it does become, how do I memorize this? How do I habituate it? And that we can start working on that even now. But,
Yeah.
Writing will be one thing.
Yes.
Making a list of things I want to do, and then reading books, fiction, and integrating the contents with the conceptual, like philosophical concepts. I think that's probably what I can do right now.
Yeah.
And then habit will be just, I guess, to some extent reflecting over concretes and asking myself, what would I do next time? What would I do instead?
That's a way, yes.
Consulting a list.
That would be like, that'd almost be like CVT. Like that's kind of what you do. Like you look at what you did, maybe how would you think about it differently the next time?
Right.
I mean, it's the same idea there.
Right.
Like you're reflecting on these things for better behavior in the future.
Right. Yeah, okay. I will try and figure out a way to start that now, even though this is imperfect. Yeah, I will try and, with what I've got, I will try and see if I can work out how to integrate that. Okay.
And sometimes habituation is just like, just doing the thing, which would mostly apply to productivity. Like if you want to be more productive about writing, just keep writing. If you want to be more productive about whatever field it is about, let's say math, you just keep doing it. Even if you're confused, you just keep doing it. And eventually it just starts to happen. As weird as that might sound, it just happens eventually through the practice. It becomes habitual.
I don't think from what I've learned, the approach for me cannot be to just do something, especially if I get stuck, because you can start to do something, but when you get stuck, my approach has always been just keep trying and try harder. But if you're stuck, it could just mean like there's some issue that you're not, like you're not doing things intelligently, or you need to step back and reassess concepts or something like that. So, but yeah, I get what you're saying. All right. The other thing is that with fiction, I guess to some extent, there's some simplification because, Rand wrote fiction, but if I read anything else, it's less clear what the abstraction in the concrete is. Like if I observe some behavior, or if I observe so we'll just go with some behavior. It's harder for me then to relate it to one of these abstractions, for example, which is I guess I could deal with that later as I read. I put some other fiction I was reading aside, and I'm going to reread some Rand, but I think that's one of the issues right now with the fiction. But
I'll tell you something I do when I read stories sometimes. Sometimes I might just have maybe some virtue in the back of my mind just because for whatever reason it's in my mind. Like I might think about independence, and I might be thinking like, oh, what did that character do that went against the crowd, or what did that person do that they were pressured to do, but they decided not to do because of their honesty. Like I'm not going to lie to someone because I don't want to do that to them, or something like that. It's not to be a whole like, here's a concrete, what is it? Sometimes it's a matter of what do you have in mind, and then keep your eye out for that concept, or keep your eye out for events that might fit into that concept.
Right. I might even make a list as I'm reading fiction and try and see if I can find the concrete in the abstract, find the abstraction in the concrete, I think is the expression.
Yeah, and I think it'll be a hard time not finding examples, because any story is about human action in some way or another. You're not going to find a story without something human or thinks like a human. You're always going to have some kind of interaction with reality, like to some extent of needing to think, to some extent needing to express or fail to express any of these things,
Yeah.
because you can't avoid using these things in your life. So at some level, you're always going to observe it in some way, whether it's the negation of it or the expression of it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm lucky because I can definitely start with Rand stuff, and that'll be easier than the more mixed, because she's obviously writing specific to her morality. But so I can start with that. Then when I get onto more difficult stuff, I'll figure it out. But cool. That'll be very interesting. You've helped me integrate, simplify my problem here, because I thought, like, how the hell do you do this? And now I realize it's all about the virtues, which makes sense.
Part of it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what about thinking methods? Would that be under what virtue would that be under? Like if for example, I was reading that book on thinking methods, and it said each thought, in order to think efficiently, each thought must have a purpose. The purpose must be clear, meaning valid and defined. So that would mean, you've conceptually validated the specific fundamental concepts in the proposition. Yeah. And then you ask questions and judge the questions and the answers in relation to their relevance for the purpose of that you've set. And so here is like a method, this is broad and it's not fully clear and fleshed out, but let's say it's a method. What would I file that under, and how would you even organize it under, like, whatever you file it under?
I don't think these things are exactly principles, because they could be condensed a bit better, the wording. But just taking the idea here, asking questions and judging them in relation to their relevance or purpose. But to some extent, all of them. But let's take justice first. Or no, honesty. It's not justice, honest. I think justice usually goes under honesty. Oh no, honesty is another one that you forgot to list.
Yeah,
that's all. But yeah, you could put that under honesty, because you have to ask and judge them in relation to their relevance to the purpose. Like, you have to judge things as they are. So that's honesty.
What about? Sorry, go
on. You could say independence, because you're the one asking the questions and judging their relationship.
But this is just about thought. This is just, if you want to think about something, like, how do I do this? You've got it, like, every process of thought must have a specific purpose in order for it to be efficient. Like, so let's say you've got a problem to solve. Yes. And you then that would mean you clearly define the purpose. What is it that you want to solve exactly? Are the concepts of that specific proposition that you've said you want to solve, like, okay, I want to figure out what I want to do for work, let's say. So I put that proposition out there. What does it mean, work to work? What does it mean to figure out what I want to do for work? So I validate and define clearly what it is this purpose of the process of thought is. And then I ask questions to help me achieve the goal. So this is just for my own thinking, not dealing with others. So I don't know if it would go under honesty.
It's a little bit of honesty, because just as far as recognizing this is the case and maybe not avoiding it because it took too much work or something. To some extent, you're acknowledging it too. You could call it some other ones too. It's not like there's a fine line for all of them. I'm not sure if there's an argument that these are all of them necessarily. They're just like the ones given the most attention. It's not like it's in a exhaustive list. I forget where I read that. I need to find that quote. So it might not necessarily fit cleanly in anything. I mean, you can call rationality a virtue, like it's the one that unites them all. It's the number one virtue, or it's hard to say if it is a virtue per se, but anything that is a virtue is a type of rationality. So you could think about it like it's rationality because you're trying to identify the reality the way it is.
Yeah, this might also be that you need, there are other virtues, because these are not exhaustive. They're just basic and most essential. So it may be the case that you need some other ones, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but these
fit.
are the ones that are given the most attention because
Right.
they usually do enough work. They
Right.
usually capture everything you need,
Right.
but you might have an extra one.
But then, okay, I mean, this is a bit of a mouthful, this one, but let's say meditation.
Yeah.
How would you then fit, like, what does it mean to fit that into a virtue? Like, how does that even, that's not even a principle. I don't, but
the action is aimed towards a virtue, I think. I think you're
right.
aiming at a virtue still. You could call that productiveness because it's how to get your mind to work well, which might include this sort of technique that it's in the name of trying to work well and work efficiently and clearly and accomplishing things.
Yeah. Still, yeah. But it's not like you use it as a, it's, yeah, maybe it doesn't fit into a virtue because it's one of those things where it's like, it's not like as I walk through the day, it's not a fundamental thing that I use as a principle to make decisions or choices or
Yeah.
do actions, right?
It serves productivity. I guess you
right.
could say
Right.
it's in service of productivity.
Right. But it's not like part of the,
No.
whatever, I don't know how else to talk about it, but yeah, it's not part of the virtues in the sense that it's like a checklist I go through where I'm like, in the action that I'm about to take, am I abiding by the principle of meditation? It's nothing like that. Whereas
No.
maybe a thinking principle might be
You're
in
engaging in meditation, which may act in service of the virtue of productivity.
Right.
Which, I mean, it should. Otherwise, it's probably immoral if it weren't against it for some reason. But it doesn't, so it's fine.
And then what would be under the values? Like any of these? So everything that's a principle that guides action would be under a virtue. And then what exactly do you file under? Like, what does it mean to like hold self-esteem as a value? If self-esteem is a feeling, that I've always been confused by.
Yeah, I don't like that phrasing either. I do have a hard time with it too. Reason, purpose, self-esteem, like cardinal values. I mean,
Right.
I would just say to have a purpose. Yeah, purpose would be a cardinal value, but it's a bit vague, the wording to me.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not clear on the values, but I'm somewhat clear, but not. There's a lot I'm not clear on. But like for example, purpose. What would it mean to hold purpose as a value, and like how do these virtues help me always hold value as a purpose? And if purpose is a value, wouldn't there also be some kind of virtue like be purposive, which includes even having your thoughts be managed by purpose? If you know what I'm saying. I don't know if that's too much, but I'm just sort of trying to figure out like what does it mean, like even something like purpose, what does it mean to hold that as a value? And then how do these feed into?
The way I understand it when I read it is that these are the things necessary to be able to value anything. Like you can't value something without a purpose. Without purpose, there's value is like it doesn't even exist. Without self-esteem, like you're not valuing anything in any normative sense. You're not really serving the purpose of your life. I mean, you need self-esteem to reach that end, right? You need reason to reach any values or ends. So without these, it's irrelevant what your values are because there's no sense in which you're valuing your life or seeking out your life. They're not legitimate values.
So to value is to love, or to love is to value. I think to love is to value. But if you hold these as a value, it means you love these things. It's an emotion. It's an emotional estimate. So then,
Yeah, that's
does
why the wording gets weird to me, because I could see that she would be saying that you require these things to value anything. You need these things. Otherwise, everything's irrelevant. Like, it's the root of all valuing, like to have a purpose, reason, to have a purpose, to use reason, to have self-esteem. But it is weird because you could say they are themselves values, and self-esteem does seem more like an emotion. So it gets confusing there to, I think, make it any, I don't know how to make it clearer. It's still a bit vague to me beyond that.
Yeah, okay. Maybe it's to value self-esteem would mean to hold up, even if you don't have it as a value, it's to strive for it. And that would mean taking specific steps in accordance with whatever's required to get there, which might mean actions over many years or something.
Probably.
Yeah. Okay.
They're necessary elements, they're necessary things to value. Like, you need to value your self-esteem, your self-worth. You need to value your reason and value a purpose, or seek it out. And by seeking a purpose out, that's almost by definition of value. Like, without a purpose, there is no value.
Right. Okay, cool. That is good. All right. Don't, by the way, a lot of existentialists, or some, don't they say, well, some actually say there's no question, what is the purpose of my life? It's an answer, and you make it for yourself, and it's subjective. But
Yes.
don't also some say it's all just an absurd joke, and that's like,
Yes.
it has no meaning anyway. But
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Absurdists.
Absurdist,
What,
right?
I think Kierkegaard is one of those.
Right.
I think. But yeah.
So, but they do on some implicit level have a purpose, maybe. Otherwise,
Yeah, they recognize you need a purpose. Whether or not that's how you do it, well, no, Rand would say no, but at least it's there.
yeah.
At least it's something. It's better than nothing at all.
Right.
They're not nihilists.
Right.
Not, well, some of them are, but they're not in the sense that there is nothing whatsoever. Somebody that like that would be even worse, because not only is there no purpose, like, not only is there no inherent purpose in reality, but there isn't even a purpose I can make up. It's just non-existent. There's no such thing.
I don't know
would
if
be the worst.
anyone is able to act that way, though, right?
Yeah, but actual nihilists might be able to. That's how much.
I don't know what an actual. I've heard the term, but I guess I don't have it concretized that well. So
I only know one example. Is that one example of a guy that Edvard Munch knew that I told you about?
oh yeah, that his
suicidal.
artist friend. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not like consistent, but it's to a large extent a dominant part of personality, for example.
For him, yeah, for that guy.
Right.
And there's not many of those, but when you see him, that's like the bottom of the barrel in the quality of life, I guess.
Right. Okay. Well, I can see how it would be important to be able to explicitly identify principles, because otherwise, and I don't just mean objectivist principles, I mean philosophical principles in general, because how else do you judge or properly evaluate someone's actions or begin to without reference to any sort of thought about it? It's all just feeling, right? You don't know if you're right or wrong.
Yeah.
This is just some notes. This is actually the layout or table of contents sort of the Brandon book on thinking. And I wanted to ask a couple of things on that before we wrap up.
Sure.
So, okay, so there's all these sections divided up, and she gives a lot of examples and stories, and here we go. Thinking, so there's things like this: crucial requirements of efficient thinking, and she'll list them in the presence of a purpose, a specific concrete purpose. So that would mean validated. thinking requires question asking, which is what I put in the previous thing. Raising what questions must I answer in order to answer my primary question. So there's this, which is the crucial requirements of thinking. Then there's all this stuff about the nature of the subconscious and, more examples on like how to think in principles. But how do you then take this and like, here, let's look at this, for example. This is thinking in principles. Remind oneself when constantly faced with a fact or event not understood. Don't reach for the easiest superficial explanations. Seek to relate concretes to principles one has already learned to one's past knowledge. If one feels one does not have the necessary knowledge, look for new principles. Like, how do I condense this into then like, I don't get how I condense this into principles. Like, I read it, I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. Some of it, I get this, but then I can walk away and then I don't make use of any of it, even though I might understand some of it because I don't know how. It's like, it's just too much information that I have no way of, I wouldn't know how to condense it into like a principle. You know what I'm saying? Like I tried this, remember, and that was a mouthful already.
Yeah. Condensing that.
Or this or anything really, like any book I approach where it provides all this knowledge and you're like, well, then how do you take something like that is there's so many aspects to it and condense it into a principle that guides thought or action?
I guess taking it in portions. There's a lot of it. It's like you got to what can you do to condense that? Scroll up a bit. Yeah, focusing on problems. I mean, part of it is you are breaking these things down, breaking down the sections. Problem solving could be the first general category of these things. What do you break down problem solving in? I don't know, focus, clarity, and modus, and specificity. And specificity can be taken apart to be questions and really it's just breaking each thing into portions and trying to put them together again. It's hard to say what to do because a lot of that is the nature of studying, how to make them stick. But the only one way to do that is just minimize the words as much as you can.
Yeah, but there's how to make something stick, which is an element of it, like a question of memory. But then there is also a question of integrating into a principle. Shouldn't a principle end up, I should be able to relate this to something else, and then have that in some way. So I guess there is a question of memory, but then, and there is a question of habit, but there is also a question of how do I then fit this into broad overarching principles and then like condense. Anyway, maybe there's no answer to that right now, but.
I mean, these seem to be forms of, like, number one, to be identified. Number two, still seems to be the same thing. One seems to be the same as two. Name and define the problem, put into words a specific concrete purpose. Same thing. Thinking requires question asking. I don't know. Identify and question. I mean, to me, that's all that it's saying here. And that's how you explain it, but that's all that's going on. You identify a purpose and ask questions. The point of knowing the validation. Concrete bound thinking. Remind oneself constantly. really it's a matter of finding the right